Now let's contrast this with an interview that Amy Goodman put together, right? So Amy Goodman for Democracy Now! Also had a segment where she talked to a Holocaust survivor, and I figure it's worth comparing these two segments a little bit. All right, let's take a look.
Ingram. Before we talk about the ceasefire in Gaza, I'd like you to respond to the censuring of the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib, whose speech we just played.
I totally support her comments, and I think it is, on top of that, shameful that her justified defense of human lives is considered anti-Semitic. It is pro-human beings. I find it horrific that the politicians have the nerve to censure righteous voices for peace and for the lives of Gazans who are being murdered. It is slaughter that is happening. And Rashida Tlaib is, in my eyes, a hero. Netanyahu's government, Israel's policies for decades has been the suppression of Palestinians, land grabs, deprivation of Palestinians. It is painful for me as someone who has experienced all of the terrors that Gazans are experiencing, and even the horrific attacks in Israel by Hamas. But Hamas' attack on Israel does not justify the slaughter of women and children, especially children. I was a child of war. I have experienced all of these things. I've also known for a fact that what Israel is doing will not end this conflict. It will only exacerbate it. It will increase resistance to anything. I think that
she is 100% correct about this, by the way. Even if, right, and this is a big if, even if Israel was successful and completely eliminated Hamas, the death toll to Palestinians, the unimaginable levels of suffering that is currently being inflicted upon Palestinians and upon the Palestinian diaspora that would be soon to follow, right? It would inevitably breed more anti-Israel groups. You know, Hamas is like an idea born of Israeli occupation and oppression, right? That is the foundation of Hamas, fundamentally. And even if you kill all of those people, the continuing existence of oppression of Palestinians by the state of Israel is going to create more of those groups. And in that way, it's a battle that like really cannot be won and only exists to perpetuate suffering. And so she is very correct about this. And there's also the likelihood that, like, once the diaspora goes out, the diaspora that has suffered here, it's going to catalyze anger in the surrounding regions around Israel as well.
Biden needs to defund all of the money that is given to Israel. I think he should not only call for a ceasefire, I think he needs to start thinking about peace. We cannot continue to make wars and then call for ceasefires only to have wars start again after the ceasefire ends. We've experienced this over and over and over again. I am so tired of having to protest everything, wars, gun violence, the war against women. It is ridiculous that we are not
Hey, tipster.
able to think clearly. My husband has an expression, and that is all about the Benjis. I think that the happiest people in the universe must be the manufacturers of armaments, and probably are also complicit in the promotion. The fact that the United States is complicit in this murder of children is, to me, a horrific indictment of inhumanity. And I applaud Rashida Tlaib with all of my heart, with all of my being. I think she's fantastic. I just wish that there were more voices to join her in the House.
Marion Ingram, I wanted to ask you, you grew up in Hamburg, Germany in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Could you tell us and to our audience some of your experiences that shaped and determined and made you want to participate in these protests in Washington against the Israeli bombardment and invasion of Gaza?
Because I am a Jew. My mother was a Jew. My family was murdered in 1941. My Jewish family was murdered in 1941. Hamburg Jews were sent to Minsk in Belarusia, where upon arrival they were stripped and then shot and dumped into a mass grave. My grandmother was taken to by two Gestapo who came to my mother's apartment and took her away the night before I turned 6 years old. From about the time I was 3 years old, I was aware that I was the object of hate of the German government, the German country. It was made clear by a playmate who told me that she wouldn't play with me because I was a dirty Jew pig. I had no idea what she was talking about. This horrific war against Jews and Germans who protested the Nazi regime progressed. It got worse. My mother had to go to the Gestapo every week. The only reason we were not taken in 1941 was because my mother had married a non-Jew. And this saved us in 1941. But in 1943, the Nazis said that all Jewish spouses were to be exterminated as well. And in 1943, in the summer of 1943, my mother got our deportation order to Theresienstadt. My mother tried to commit suicide in the hopes that my father's relatives would take in her children, in the hope that she would be able to save her three daughters. She had sent me off to one of the relatives who was instrumental in helping us. And I had not been allowed to be outside since the Nazis came to power. And it struck me as very odd, I was 7.5, that she let me take my baby sister to my father's cousin. And I turned around and I found my mother with her head in the gas oven. And I pulled her out. And my mother lived and never had another such moment and was
Jesus.
horrifically strong. Right after that, the Allies bombed the city of Hamburg. It was called Operation Gomorrah. The Brits bombed at night. The Americans bombed during the day. It was a 10-day and 10-night uninterrupted bombing. My mother and I were not allowed in a bomb shelter. We were forced to run through flaming streets. The Allies dropped phosphorus, and I saw human beings jumping into the lake and the canals and coming up. They were like human candles. Their bodies were in flame, and every time they jumped into the canals and lakes, the flames would be doused, but the minute they came up for air, they would be in flames. As a 7.5-year-old, I saw more dead bodies burned to a crisp. Two things. I'm a pacifist, and it's just ironic that this horrific revenge attack on civilians, it was entirely targeted on civilians.
This is something that, like, we don't talk a ton about in American history classrooms, but there was a concerted effort and belief that through bombing civilian targets towards, the end of World War II, that the spirit of population could be broken, and thereby bringing about an end to the war faster, which obviously horrific and ineffective, to say the least. They also tried this in Japan, by the way, famously, like the fire bombings of Japan, killed far more people than the nuclear bombs. But the nuclear bombs being dropped on Japan was another prong of this strategy as applied to Japan. It was an unnecessary bombing to try and break the will of the people, effectively. And it, of course, did not work, and was awful and horrific and a colossal war crimes. Yeah, napalm was actually invented specifically to blanket Japan in fire. Yep.
Saved my life because there were so many burned bodies that could not be identified that we were able to go into hiding. This was arranged. My father was in the underground. He had managed to arrange for us to be hidden in a sort of ex-urban farm outside the city of Hamburg by communist underground members. The elderly couple who hid us were not pro-Semitic, but they were virulently anti-Nazi. And we were in high...
That's a very polite way of saying they were not a fan of Jews, but they were very, very much anti-fascist. Yikes.
In a tar paper shack when there were no people around. When there were people around, we had to go hide in an earthen dugout. And on my 8th birthday, on 19th November 1943, in the earthen dugout, I told my mother that if I lived, I would never, ever be quiet, and that I wanted to become a peacemaker. Well, I've kept that promise. I have not been able to figure out how I can get governments to make peace, but I continue to battle on all fronts. I have battled when I came to America as a 17-year-old. I saw that America was a racist country, and I became active in the civil rights movement.
Marion, in part two
Yes,
of our conversation,
sorry.
we're going to talk about your
Oh my God. I just. Like, sometimes interactions I have with chatters on here stick with me for a while. And I remember towards the beginning of this conflict, right? Someone came into chat and asked, belligerently, kind of how would you, what would you have Israel do? Essentially, they asked, how, if you were in charge of Israel, what would you do? Well, and I said, you negotiate. That's how we do anything. If violence occurs, that is a failure of negotiation. You certainly don't kill 10,000 people, 4,000 of whom are children. And I remember that person being absolutely baffled. I think they laughed at me at the time. And it's just like, that's how you do anything in this world. You talk to people. You come to an understanding. You fix the problem. And it's, I don't know, like, if this lady can watch people being immolated in the streets and in the rivers and the nearby lakes, and see so many people being burned by the Allies during World War II, and so many of her friends and family being taken away by the Gestapo, and see her mother trying to kill herself in order to try and save her, and see, like, all of these horrors, and she still believes in peace, then yeah, I think expecting people who have been through far less, I think expecting them to be able to have a conversation with people they dislike is, and find like a mutual point of understanding and agreement that avoids, again, the outcome of killing thousands of children. I think it's possible, Examples like her make me hopeful that solutions can be found. It's a strength. It's a strength I don't know that I have, frankly. But she gives me hope. The death toll is now 11,000. That's not surprising. I have not seen the Hassan and Ethan conversation, no.
your history in the civil rights movement. But just before we go to the Israeli-American genocide historian, Omer Bartov, just if you could share a message to the world about what never again means to you.
To me, it would mean never again to repeat the horrors that we have committed throughout my lifetime, and certainly before that. Nothing has been learned from the atrocities of the mid-20th century, the continued atrocities in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
We've been holding signs of you calling for a ceasefire.
Yeah, I want more than that. I want peace. I'm disgusted at the fact that not a single nation, not a single leader has even mentioned that word, as though that is a word of a dangerous word. There has to be a way of bringing together warring parties. When the Allies attacked Hamburg, Germany, thinking that that would weaken the military conflict, it only strengthened it. What Israel is doing in...
Yeah, because again, right? Like, if you're just mass slaughtering civilians, well, then your enemy's going to think, oh, well, if we tried to do any negotiation whatsoever, like, they're just going to kill us. Like, why even bother? We either have to fight or we all have to die. Like, those are the options effectively being offered on the table when there is mass violence against civilians like this.
In Gaza, in the West Bank, and has been doing, is only going to strengthen the attack on Israel. You cannot expect that people will be quiet after what we've all witnessed. I say, stop this madness.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in Professor Omer Bartov, one of the most prominent scholars of Holocaust and genocide studies. Your sense, Professor Bartov, of what Israel is doing right now in Gaza?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. Look, what Israel is doing right now, according to its own political leaders and military commanders, is attempting to destroy Hamas, which is the hegemonic power in Gaza at the moment. And it claims to be doing it, as retaliation for the heinous attack on October 7th, where over 1,000 civilians were butchered and 240 people were kidnapped and are still kept in Gaza. But he claims to be doing it also because it feels that without doing that, it would be
Hey, Karen.
permanently under threat from that organization. So that's its own position. The problem with this position is not only is the massive and excessive and disproportionate killing of civilians, of Palestinian civilians in Gaza during this operation, but also that it doesn't have any clear political horizon. It is not clear what the day after would look like.
And that's by design, by the way. Like, it is by design that Netanyahu has not set out an end game here. Because the end game is something completely unacceptable, right? That is the reason you do not define the end game. It's not because there's confusion about within his war cabinet about what they want to do. It's because he does not want to put forward a reality that the world would have to look at and reject. So instead, they don't offer one and continue their atrocities and continue to push the line more and more. And they push people out of northern Gaza, over 1 million people currently displaced already in the conflict. And they have nowhere to go. And we remember that there was a leaked internal document from the State Department of Israel that indicated that the current plan was to displace northern Gaza and then displace southern Gaza after northern Gaza is suitably suppressed and occupied. So, either moving the civilians in southern Gaza back to the north or through the Rafah border crossing into northern Egypt, where, there's no, it's a desert. There's not a support mechanism for millions of people suddenly appearing in northern Egypt. It's a death sentence.
And the reason the Israeli government does not want to talk about that is that it does not want to have any sort of compromise with the Palestinians. And that has been the policy of the Netanyahu
Yeah, it's effectively a rejection of any kind of peace.
administration, or many administrations, for decades now. And Netanyahu actually kept Hamas quite strong and kept the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank quite weak, so that
And keep in mind, Netanyahu funded when he says Netanyahu kept the Hamas leadership strong. It literally, he allowed billions of dollars from Qatar to flow into the Hamas organization. Over $1 billion in just 6 years, and that's not including like the last 10 years, right? So like, he allowed Hamas to hold and maintain power by design. And there are, by the way, other political groups within Gaza that are dedicated to peaceful coexistence, that are dedicated to non-violence. All right? Piers Morgan even had one of the leaders of one of those groups on his show. But that leader had been shot multiple times by Israeli snipers. He didn't get billions of dollars to fund his organization. No, he got bullets. And I think this is indicative of how Netanyahu has deliberately orchestrated an event like this with a deliberately nebulous endgame in order to complete the eradication of Palestinians within Israel.